good technique on the guitar is not something that's set in stone, but it's also not a free-for-all where you can do whatever you want. Welcome to Guitar Nutrition. I'm Matt. In this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my philosophy on technique and give you some guidelines so you can decide whether or not you want to break the rules, because there kind of actually aren't any rules. There's just guiding principles that, if you understand, will help you develop your best technique. So a definition of technique that I've been enjoying recently is this idea that technique is the most effective and efficient way for your body to move when you're playing the guitar. I kind of have two guiding philosophies when it comes to deciding whether or not something is good technique or not. Number one, is it going to cause you physical harm if you do it like that? For example, are you going to develop RSI in your wrists as a result of playing the guitar that way? And number two, does it provide an additional benefit that you wouldn't have if you didn't do it that way? Because if it doesn't cause harm, but it also doesn't add a benefit, then there's no point in playing that way. On the flip side, if it does provide a benefit, but it also causes harm, then maybe don't do that. So thumb position is a great example of this. Classically, when you play guitar, your thumb should be kind of down here, down the neck. And a lot of people might say that it's bad technique to have your thumb kind of up the top. But then you'll also see other people who play entire chords with their thumb over the top. Now, I don't personally particularly like having my thumb over the top. However, for this D over F sharp chord, I think it's the best way to play it. That doesn't mean that it stays up over the top at all times, because technique is a bit of a dynamic thing depending on the situation. But when we apply these two questions and we ask ourselves, okay, is having the thumb over the top gonna cause any harm? No, it's not gonna cause any harm. Does it provide an additional benefit? Yeah, it allows you to play notes with it in a way that you couldn't before. Maybe it allows you to mute the strings up the top in a way that you couldn't before. So it's not causing any harm and it's providing an additional benefit. Then having the thumb over the top is fine. Now, should we learn that way? Maybe not. That might restrict our movement. Like I said, technique is dynamic. So often when I'm teaching beginner students, what I'll do is get them to bring their thumb down, because that will increase the reach that they have with their fingers here and allow them to play chords with more clarity and that kind of thing. But as you progress as a guitar player, you don't have to be hardline about keeping that thumb down at all times, because if you understand the principles of technique, you realize that you can actually make these adjustments that won't cause any harm and will provide an additional benefit. Here's another example of a thing that people do that I don't think provides any additional benefit. It doesn't cause harm, but it doesn't provide an additional benefit. So why bother doing it? Let's say we're playing, just this pentatonic pattern 1. My guitar's not plugged in, but doesn't matter for this example. We're playing a pentatonic pattern 1. Now, what you might see some people doing is playing that with fingers 1 and 3 only. So when there's a gap of 4 frets, they're doing it with 1 and 3. Whole thing with 1 and 3. Is that going to cause harm? No, it's not going to cause harm. Is it going to provide an additional benefit? No, it's also not going to provide an additional benefit. In fact, it's going to reduce the opportunities for you to use that pinky, that 4th finger. And personally, I find it a little confusing if we're constantly switching between frets with the same finger when we don't need to. As a general rule, I think good technique kind of indicates that we should be playing 1 finger per fret. So if we're in this position, in what I like to think of as the default position, then we would be using 1 finger per fret as we come down here. This is what I like to think of as a default position. This gives us excellent vertical reach, but limits our reach horizontally somewhat. We also have what I like to think of as the angled position, which gives us far better horizontal reach, but limits our reach vertically somewhat. We get the most utility when we are able to dynamically flow between these two positions. People who are using this third finger like this the entire time, by default, kind of just relying on this angle position, and it doesn't provide any additional benefit. If anything, it's something that they've chosen to do because they didn't like how weak their fourth finger was. Check out my video on preferences versus prisons to kind of see why that's a problem. Now, there are players that decide that they want to play like this with their third finger. John Mayer plays like this a lot of the time. That's fine. The great thing about technique and understanding these principles of technique is you can choose to do whatever you like. I just don't think that using the third finger provides any additional benefit. I think you can make a case that it actually limits the utility. Now, a guitarist like John Mayer has enormous hands, so probably doesn't matter for him. But when you're starting out and developing your technique, I don't think you should emulate guitarists like John Mayer who have chosen to kind of break the rules a little bit as their preference. Playing like that's not going to cause them any physical harm, but it's also not providing any benefit. And when you're starting out, if you try and model your technique on that, all you're going to be doing is maximizing the downsides. So when you're developing your technique, when you're learning how things work, what you want to do is learn the correct way before you decide to break it. If you learn how to think about technique, if you understand how the body moves and think about the most effective and efficient way of doing certain movements, then that will allow you to understand why we want to do things a certain way. And if you decide that you have a preference to do it a slightly different way, then that's fine. But if you're led by these principles of technique and kind of understanding how the body works, then you'll be able to make the determination that if you want to do it that way, it's not going to cause you harm, and maybe it doesn't provide an additional benefit, but actually you just prefer doing it that way, which is fine as well. At the end of the day, good technique should serve the player. It comes down to how you want to do things, but that should be determined by an understanding of how the body moves so that you can do it in the most effective way, most efficient way, without causing harm to yourself. A great thing to do is to watch other players who you really admire, who have good technique. Watch them play. Ask yourself, why are they moving that way? Why are they doing things a certain way? Try it out. And you'll either decide that actually you like doing it that way, or you might think, that's not for me. But if you're able to understand their reasoning behind the way that they move, that will help you develop your own technique. YouTube thinks you might enjoy this video. Otherwise, go play some guitar. I'll talk to you next time.